Ethan Graves' muscles tensed as he scanned the dimly lit bar. Old habits died hard. 5 years out of special forces, and he still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He knocked back his whiskey, savoring the burn. Another? The bartender's voice cut through the haze of classic rock and stale beer. Ethan shook his head. Better not. Early day tomorrow. As he stood to leave, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A woman, no, women, moving with inhuman grace through the crowd. Their beauty was otherworldly, quite literally. Ethan's hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that wasn't there. What the hell, he muttered. Before he could react further, a sharp pain exploded at the base of his skull. The world tilted, then faded to black. Ethan awoke to the hum of machinery and the sensation of weightlessness. His eyes snapped open, taking in the metallic chamber around him. This was no earthly vessel. Subject is conscious, a crisp feminine voice announced. Ethan's gaze locked onto the speaker, a tall, statuesque woman with electric blue skin and eyes that seemed to glow from within. She wore form-fitting armor that accentuated her athletic build. "Where am I?" Ethan demanded, struggling against the restraints that held him suspended in midair. "Who the hell are you people?" The blue-skinned woman's lips curved into a small smile. "You are aboard the Celestial Matriarch, flagship of the Celestian Fleet. I am Commander Lyra. Welcome, Ethan Graves." Ethan's mind raced. Aliens. He was on a goddamn alien spaceship. "How do you know my name?" "We've been observing your planet for some time," Lyra replied. "You, specifically, have qualities of great interest to us." "What qualities?" Ethan growled, renewing his efforts to break free. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Strength, resilience, genetic diversity. You'll make an excellent addition to our breeding program." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Breeding program?" "Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but—" "This is no game, Mr. Graves," Lyra interrupted. "The future of our species depends on this. You should consider it an honor." Before Ethan could retort, the chamber door slid open with a hiss. A new figure entered. Taller than Lyra, with skin the color of burnished gold and hair like spun silver. Her very presence seemed to command respect. "General Serafina," Lyra said, bowing her head slightly. "The subject is awake and responsive." Serafina's piercing gaze swept over Ethan, assessing him with cool detachment. "So I see. Has he been briefed on his situation?" "I was just beginning to explain, General." Serafina nodded. "Very well. Continue." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I don't need any explanations. I need you to let me go. Now." "That won't be happening," Serafina said, her voice as sharp as a blade. "You are far too valuable to us, Ethan Graves. Our civilization faces extinction without an influx of new genetic material. You and others like you are the key to our survival." "So what? You're going to force me to breed?" Ethan spat the word out. A hint of amusement flickered in Serafina's eyes. "Force is such an ugly word. You'll be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The winning clan will have the right to your genetic material. How that material is obtained is between you and them." Ethan's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of twisted nightmare. "You can't do this. It's rape." Serafina's expression hardened. "Your morality is irrelevant here. The survival of our species takes precedence over your personal comfort." "To hell with your species," Ethan roared, thrashing against his bonds. "I won't be part of this." In a flash, Serafina was inches from his face, her eyes blazing. "You don't have a choice, human. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for you." Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "I've survived worse than you, alien. You have no idea what you're dealing with." A ghost of a smile played at Serafina's lips. "On the contrary, Ethan Graves, we know exactly what we're dealing with. That's why you're here." She turned to Lyra. "Prepare him for processing. I want a full genetic workup and physical assessment." "Yes, General," Lyra replied. As Serafina strode out of the chamber, Ethan called after her. "This isn't over." She paused at the doorway, glancing back over her shoulder. "You're right. It's only just beginning." The next few hours passed in a blur of tests and examinations. Ethan was poked, prodded, and scanned by an array of advanced medical equipment. Through it all, he remained silent, his mind working furiously to find a way out of this nightmare. Finally, he was led to a small, stark room. A bed, a chair, and not much else. The door sealed behind him with a soft click. Ethan paced the confines of his cell, muscles coiled with tension. He'd faced captivity before, during his time in Special Forces, but this was something else entirely. The door slid open, revealing a new Celestian. This one was shorter than Lyra or Seraphina, with skin the color of deep amethyst and hair that seemed to shimmer like starlight. "Greetings, Ethan Graves," she said, her voice melodic. "I am Zara, your liaison for the duration of your stay with us." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "My stay? You mean my imprisonment?" Zara's expression remained neutral. "Your perspective is understandable, but misguided. You are not a prisoner, but an honored guest." "Guests can leave whenever they want," Ethan retorted. "True," Zara conceded, "but can they change the fate of an entire species?" "You have that power, Ethan Graves. Is that not worth considering?" Ethan paused and studying her. "You really believe that, don't you? That this auction is the only way to save your people?" Zara nodded solemnly. "It is our last hope. Our genetic diversity has reached a critical low. Without an infusion of new DNA, we face extinction within generations. And humans are what? Your perfect match? Your species has shown remarkable adaptability and resilience," Zara explained. "Qualities our own people desperately need." Ethan sank onto the bed, his mind whirling. "This is insane. You can't just breed your way out of this problem." Zara's eyes softened slightly. "I understand this is difficult for you to accept, but please try to see beyond your own discomfort. The fate of an entire civilization hangs in the balance." "My discomfort?" Ethan's voice rose. "You kidnapped me. You're planning to sell me off like breeding stock." "Your anger is justified," Zara said calmly, "but it changes nothing. The auction will proceed, with or without your cooperation. It would be easier for everyone if you chose to participate willingly." Ethan's fist clenched. "And if I refuse?" Zara's expression hardened. "Then measures will be taken to ensure your compliance. I hope it doesn't come to that." A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You people have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." Zara met his gaze steadily. "On the contrary, Ethan Graves, we know exactly what we're dealing with. That's why you're here." With that, she turned and left, the door sealing behind her. Ethan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, analyzing every detail of his surroundings, searching for weaknesses, for any chance of escape. But deep down, a part of him knew the truth. He was trapped, light years from home, at the mercy of an alien race desperate for survival. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Ethan was subjected to more tests, fitted for elaborate ceremonial garments, and given crash courses in Celestian culture and etiquette. Through it all, he remained outwardly compliant while inwardly seething. He watched, he listened, he learned, and he waited for his moment. That moment came during a final fitting session. Zara was adjusting his robes when Ethan made his move. In a flash, he had her pinned against the wall, his forearm pressed against her throat. "Listen carefully," he growled. "You're going to get me off this ship, or I swear to God." A searing pain exploded in his side. Ethan stumbled back, gasping. Zara stood there, a small device in her hand, her expression a mix of disappointment and resignation. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this," she said softly, "but you leave us no choice." As Ethan struggled to remain conscious, the door burst open. Seraphina strode in, flanked by guards. "I told you he couldn't be trusted," she snapped at Zara. "Restrain him." As the guards moved to subdue him, Ethan locked eyes with Seraphina. Despite the pain, he managed a defiant grin. "Is this how you treat all your honored guests?" For a moment, something flickered in Seraphina's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or grudging admiration. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Take him to holding," she ordered. "The auction begins in 3 hours. He'll be ready whether he likes it or not." As Ethan was dragged away, his mind raced. The auction, his last chance. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The grand hall of the celestial matriarch buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of Celestian warriors, representing clans from across the galaxy, filled the tiered seating around a central stage. The air crackled with tension and excitement. Ethan stood in the wings, his heart pounding. The ceremonial robes felt suffocating, a constant reminder of his predicament. Zara hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Remember," she whispered, "the more cooperative you are, the better your chances of a favorable outcome." Ethan's jaw clenched. Favorable for who? Before Zara could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. Seraphina strode onto the stage, her presence commanding instant attention. "Esteemed warriors of the Celestian clans," her voice rang out, "we gather here today for an event of monumental importance. The future of our species hangs in the balance, and before us stands the key to our salvation." She gestured dramatically toward the wings. "I present to you Ethan Graves of Earth." Ethan felt a push from behind. Stumbling slightly, he found himself center stage, blinking under the harsh lights. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A wave of murmurs and appreciative looks swept through the hall. Seraphina continued her speech, extolling Ethan's genetic virtues and military prowess, but Ethan barely heard her. His eyes scanned the crowd, assessing, planning. There had to be a way out of this. "Let the bidding begin!" Seraphina's voice cut through his thoughts. What followed was a blur of shouted numbers and flashing lights. Clan representatives vied fiercely for the right to Ethan's genetic material. The bids climbed higher and higher, reaching astronomical sums. Through it all, Ethan stood stoically, his expression betraying nothing of the turmoil within. He caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. Lyra, watching with clinical interest. Zara, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and regret. And always, always, he felt Seraphina's gaze upon him. When he dared to meet her eyes, he saw something there he hadn't expected. Not just cold calculation, but a flicker of, what? Curiosity? Admiration? Whatever it was, it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As the bidding reached a fever pitch, Ethan's mind raced. This was it, his last chance. Whatever he was going to do, it had to be now. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, raising his hand for silence. The hall fell quiet, all eyes turning to him in surprise. "Before this goes any further," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I have something to say." Seraphina moved to intervene, but Ethan pressed on. "You all see me as some kind of prize to be won, a solution to your problems. But let me tell you something about humans." He paused, making eye contact with as many Celestians as he could. "We don't take kindly to being controlled, to being used. You think you can just pluck us from our homes and expect us to fall in line? You have no idea what you're dealing with." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Seraphina's eyes narrowed dangerously. "The human speaks out of turn," she declared. "This changes nothing. The auction will—" "The hell it will," Ethan interrupted. "You want my genetics? My strength? My resilience? Then you'd better be prepared for everything that comes with it, including my free will." He turned to address the crowd directly. "I challenge any one of you to face me in combat. If you can beat me, fair and square, then maybe, just maybe, you've earned the right to my DNA. But I won't be sold like cattle to the highest bidder." A shocked silence fell over the hall. Seraphina's face was a mask of barely contained fury. But before she could speak, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I accept your challenge, human." The crowd parted to reveal a towering Celestian warrior, her skin a deep crimson, her eyes blazing with determination. Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. This was far from over, but at least now he had a fighting chance. As the hall erupted into chaos, Ethan locked eyes with Seraphina. For a moment, something passed between them. A grudging respect, perhaps, or the first sparks of a rivalry that would shake the very foundations of Celestian society. Whatever it was, one thing was certain. The real battle was just beginning. The arena pulsed with electric tension as Ethan squared off against Zandra. the crimson-skinned Celestian warrior. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles coiled and ready. This was familiar territory, the calm before the storm of combat. Sandra struck first, her fist a blur of motion. Ethan ducked, feeling the whoosh of air above his head. He countered with a swift uppercut, his knuckles connecting with her jaw. The crowd roared, a cacophony of alien voices that reverberated through the chamber. "Impressive, human," Zandra growled, a predatory grin spreading across her face. "But you can't win. Why not submit now and save yourself the pain?" Ethan smirked, dodging another punch. "Sorry, but I've never been good at following orders, especially from aliens trying to use me as a breeding stud." The fight raged on, a brutal dance of strikes, counters, and grapples. Ethan's ribs ached from a vicious elbow, and he tasted blood in his mouth. But he refused to yield, matching Zandra blow for blow. As they grappled, locked in a test of strength, Ethan's gaze drifted to Seraphina. Her face was a mask of cool detachment, but he caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Concern? Admiration? Whatever it was, it fueled him, lending strength to his tired muscles. With a roar of effort, Ethan broke Zandra's hold, using her momentum to flip her over his shoulder. She crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact, the arena falling silent for a heartbeat before erupting into chaos. "Do you yield?" Ethan demanded, standing over his fallen opponent. Zandra glared up at him, defiance warring with grudging respect in her eyes. After a tense moment, she nodded. "I yield, human. You fight, well?" As the crowd's frenzy reached a fever pitch, Seraphina appeared at Ethan's side. "Impressive," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "But this changes nothing. The auction will proceed." Ethan met her gaze, a challenge in his eyes. "We'll see about that." In the days that followed, Ethan found himself thrust into a whirlwind of alien politics and intrigue. The auction continued, but now it had evolved into something far more complex than a simple bidding war. Celestian clan representatives vied for his attention, each trying to outmaneuver the others. Ethan quickly realized that his victory over Zandra had elevated his status from mere genetic material to a potential power player in their society. During a lavish reception, Ethan navigated the room with carefully cultivated charm. He approached a group of Celestian dignitaries, their skin shimmering in hues of sapphire and emerald. "Gentlemen," he said, inclining his head respectfully, "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about the Nexus project. Fascinating stuff. I'd love to hear more about how it ties into your clan's genetic research." The dignitaries exchanged surprised glances. One of them, a tall Celestian with piercing silver eyes, spoke. "You're well informed for a human, Ethan Graves. Perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye." Ethan smiled disarmingly. "I'm a quick study, and I've found that knowledge is the best currency in any negotiation." As he engaged in the intricate dance of diplomacy, Ethan felt Seraphina's eyes on him from across the room. He caught her gaze, raising an eyebrow in silent challenge. The ghost of a smile played at her lips before she turned away. Later that evening, Ethan found himself alone with Seraphina in her private quarters, ostensibly to review security protocols. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "You're adapting quickly to our ways," Seraphina observed, her golden eyes studying him intently. Ethan shrugged, leaning against the wall with practiced nonchalance. "Like I said, I'm a quick study. Your people are fascinating, Seraphina. Complex, driven, beautiful." He let the last word hang in the air, watching for her reaction. Seraphina's expression remained impassive, but Ethan caught the slight quickening of her breath. "We are what we need to be," she replied, her voice cool. "Our survival depends on it." Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "And what about what you want, Seraphina? Not as a general, not as a Celestian, but as a woman?" For a moment the mask slipped. Ethan saw a flicker of vulnerability, of longing in Seraphina's eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by steely resolve. "What I want is irrelevant," she said sharply. "This auction, your presence here, it's about the survival of my species. Nothing more." Ethan held her gaze unconvinced. "If you say so, General, but I think we both know there's more to this than simple genetics." Before Seraphina could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. She snapped to attention, her professional mask firmly back in place. "We have an intruder alert. Stay here." As she rushed out, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was shifting into dangerous, uncharted territory. The next day brought new challenges. A delegation from a rival clan demanded an audience with Ethan, claiming they had information vital to his decision-making process. Serafina was against it, but Ethan insisted on hearing them out. "Knowledge is power," he argued. "The more I understand about the situation, the better equipped I'll be to make the right choice." Reluctantly, Serafina agreed. But as they entered the meeting chamber, Ethan's instincts screamed danger. The delegation's leader, a striking Celestian named Lyra, seemed too eager, too ingratiating. "Ethan Graves," Lyra purred, her violet eyes gleaming. "We've been so looking forward to this meeting. There's so much you don't know about the true nature of this auction." Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Serafina. "I'm all ears, Lyra. Why don't you enlighten me?" As Lyra launched into her presentation, Ethan's suspicions grew. He caught Serafina's eye, seeing his own unease mirrored there. Suddenly, the room filled with a thick, sweet-smelling gas. Ethan's vision blurred, his limbs growing heavy. He heard Serafina shout something, saw her lunge for Lyra. Then darkness claimed him. Ethan awoke with a pounding headache, his mouth dry as sandpaper. As his vision cleared, he found himself in a stark holding cell, Serafina unconscious beside him. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but his training kicked in. Assess the situation, find a way out, protect your ally. He checked Serafina for injuries, relief washing over him when he found only a small bump on her head. As he tended to her, her eyes fluttered open. "Ethan," she murmured, disoriented. "What happened?" "Ambush," he replied grimly. "Looks like not everyone's happy with our negotiations." Serafina's eyes hardened as memory returned. "Lyra," she spat. "I should have known. Her clan has always been ambitious." Ethan helped her sit up, his hand lingering on her arm longer than strictly necessary. "Any idea where we are?" Serafina shook her head. "Not precisely, but judging by the design of this cell, we're likely on one of Lyra's clan ships, which means we're no longer on the Celestial Matriarch," Ethan finished. "Great. Any chance of rescue?" "Eventually," Serafina said. "But by then it may be too late. Lyra will try to force your compliance, use your genetic material without consent. We can't let that happen." Ethan's jaw clenched. "No, we can't. So what's the plan, General?" For the first time since he'd met her, Serafina looked uncertain. I don't know. This situation, it's unprecedented. I've never..." Ethan took her hand, surprising them both. "Hey, we'll figure this out. Together." Serafina stared at their joined hands, then met his gaze. Something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. "Together," she agreed softly. As they began to formulate an escape plan, Ethan realized that somewhere along the line, his priorities had shifted. It wasn't just about his own freedom anymore. He cared about Serafina, about the future of the Celestians. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. The cell door slid open with a hiss, revealing Lyra flanked by armed guards. Her smile was predatory as she surveyed her captives. "Well, well," she purred. "The great General Serafina, brought low. And you, Ethan Graves, you've caused quite a stir in our little corner of the galaxy." Ethan rose, positioning himself protectively in front of Serafina. "If you think this little stunt is going to work, you're sadly mistaken." Lyra's smile widened. "Oh, I think you'll find I'm quite persuasive. Now, shall we discuss terms, or would you prefer we do this the hard way?" Ethan and Serafina exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it united. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Lyra," Serafina said, her voice cold as ice. "This act of treachery will not go unpunished." Lyra laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Treachery? I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. The future of our species is at stake after all." "Surely you can understand that, Serafina." "What I understand," Serafina replied, "is that you've committed an act of war against the ruling clan. Even if you succeed here, you'll never be able to claim legitimacy." Ethan watched the exchange, his mind racing. There was more going on here than a simple power grab. He needed to buy time, to understand the bigger picture. Look, he interjected, I get it. You're all trying to save your species. But this, kidnapping, coercion, there has to be a better way. Lyra's gaze snapped to him, her eyes narrowing. And what would you suggest, human? You who know nothing of our struggles, our history. Ethan met her gaze unflinchingly. I know more than you think, and I know that forcing this issue will only lead to conflict and resentment. If you want my help, my willing help, then let's talk. For real this time. A tense silence fell over the room. Lyra studied Ethan, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Very well. You have 1 hour to present your case. Impress me, human, and perhaps we can come to an arrangement. As Lyra and her guards withdrew, Ethan turned to Serafina. Okay, we need to pool our knowledge. What's really going on here? What aren't you telling me about this genetic crisis? Serafina hesitated, conflict evident in her eyes. Then with a sigh, she began to speak. The truth is, Ethan, our situation is far more dire than we've let on. The genetic degradation isn't just threatening our future. It's killing us now. Our children are being born with severe defects, and our population is dwindling rapidly. Ethan absorbed this information, his mind reeling. And you think human DNA is the key to solving this? Serafina nodded. Your species has shown remarkable genetic resilience and adaptability. We believe that by introducing human genetic material into our population, we can reverse the degradation and save our people. But why the secrecy? Why the auction? Why not just ask for help? Serafina's eyes flashed with a mixture of pride and shame. We are a proud people, Ethan. The idea of admitting our weakness, of relying on another species for our very survival, it goes against everything we believe in. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, processing this revelation. Okay, so we're dealing with a genetic crisis, political infighting, and a hell of a lot of cultural baggage. Great. Despite the gravity of the situation, Serafina's lips twitched in a small smile. When you put it that way, it does sound rather daunting. Ethan grinned back. Hey, I've faced worse odds. Now let's figure out how to get out of this cell, deal with Lyra, and maybe save your entire species while we're at it. No pressure, right? As they began to strategize, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger adventure. One that would test not just his survival skills, but his heart as well. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He and Serafina were in this together, for better or worse. Ethan's mind raced as he surveyed the cramped cell, searching for any weakness they could exploit. The low hum of the ship's engines resonated through the metal floor, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Lyra's clan had them trapped, hurtling through space towards an uncertain fate. Okay, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. We need to get out of here before we reach wherever Lyra's taking us. Any ideas? Serafina's golden eyes gleamed in the dim light as she examined the cell door. These ships are old, relics from a more militant time in our history. If I'm right, there might be a weakness in the locking mechanism. She ran her fingers along the door's edge, probing for imperfections. Ethan watched, admiring her focus and determination. Even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, Serafina refused to give up. There, she murmured, a note of triumph in her voice. Feel this seam. It's slightly misaligned. If we can apply enough pressure at the right angle. Ethan moved closer, his shoulder brushing against Serafina's as he examined the spot she indicated. The contact sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the growing connection between them. He pushed the feeling aside, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. Right, he said, nodding. So we just need to generate enough force to pop it open? Any ideas how we do that without any tools? Serafina's lips curved into a sly smile. Who says we don't have tools? She reached up, removing what Ethan had assumed was a purely decorative pin from her elaborate hairstyle. As she manipulated it, the pin unfolded into a slender, wickedly sharp blade. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Remind me never to underestimate Celestian fashion accessories. A wise policy, Serafina agreed, her tone light despite the gravity of their situation. She set to work on the door, her movements precise and calculated. As she worked, Ethan kept watch, straining his ears for any sign of approaching guards. The minutes ticked by, tension mounting with each passing moment. Finally, there was a soft click, and the door slid open a fraction of an inch. Serafina turned to Ethan, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and anticipation. Ready? Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. Let's do this. They crept out into the corridor, every sense on high alert. The ship's interior was a maze of identical metal passageways, illuminated by harsh white light. Ethan followed Serafina's lead, trusting her knowledge of Celestian ship design to guide them. As they rounded a corner, voices echoed from up ahead. Serafina grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him into a narrow maintenance alcove. They pressed together in the tight space, holding their breath as two of Lyra's guards passed by. Don't see why we need the human alive, one was saying. Wouldn't it be easier to just harvest what we need and be done with it? Orders from Lyra, the other replied. She wants him intact for now. Something about maximizing genetic potential. As the guards' voices faded, Ethan met Serafina's gaze. The implication of what they'd overheard hung heavy between them. We need to move, Serafina whispered urgently. If they reach the genetic extraction facilities on Lyra's homeworld. She didn't need to finish the thought. Ethan nodded grimly. Lead the way. They continued their stealthy progress through the ship, narrowly avoiding detection several times. Ethan marveled at Serafina's skill and grace under pressure. She moved like a shadow, her every action calculated and precise. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a control room. Serafina's eyes lit up as she took in the banks of computers and holographic displays. Perfect. If we can access the main systems from here, we might be able to send a distress signal to the Council of Elders. Ethan took up position by the door, keeping watch while Serafina worked her magic on the alien technology. Her fingers flew over the controls, navigating complex systems with ease. I'm in, she announced after several tense minutes. But there's a problem. The long-range communications are locked down. We'd need command-level authorization to break through. Ethan's mind raced, considering their options. What about short-range? Is there anyone close enough who might be able to help? Serafina's brow furrowed in concentration as she scanned the data. Suddenly, her eyes widened. There's a Celestian science vessel about half a parsec away. If we could reach them? Do it, Ethan urged. As Serafina composed the message, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. I think they've noticed we're missing. Just a few more seconds, Serafina muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. The door to the control room slid open with a hiss. Ethan spun around, ready to fight, only to find himself face to face with Lyra herself. The Celestian leader's violet eyes blazed with fury. You disappoint me, Serafina, Lyra snarled. I expected better from a warrior of your caliber. Serafina straightened, placing herself between Lyra and Ethan. And I expected better from a leader of our people. What you're doing is wrong, Lyra. It goes against everything we stand for. Lyra's laugh was cold and bitter. What we stand for? We stand on the brink of extinction, and you waste time on sentiment and outdated morality. As Lyra monologued, Ethan noticed Serafina's hand moving subtly behind her back. She was still working the controls, buying time. There's another way, Ethan interjected, drawing Lyra's attention. Your people don't have to resort to kidnapping and forced genetic harvesting. We can work together, find a solution that benefits both our species. Lyra's eyes narrowed. You know nothing of our struggles, human. Our genetic crisis has been millennia in the making. Do you think we haven't exhausted every ethical option? Maybe you have, Ethan countered, but you haven't had access to human genetic diversity before? Think about it, Lyra. A willing partnership between our species could unlock potential you've never imagined. For a moment, doubt flickered in Lyra's eyes. Then her expression hardened once more. Pretty words, but ultimately meaningless. I will save my people, whatever the cost. She raised a weapon, its barrel glowing with an ominous energy. Step away from the console, Serafina. It's time to end this foolishness. Serafina's hand moved lightning fast, slamming down on a final control. The ship lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. Ethan reacted instinctively, tackling Lyra as her weapon discharged, the energy blast scorching the ceiling. What followed was a chaotic melee. Ethan and Serafina fought back to back, facing off against Lyra and the guards who came pouring into the room. It was a desperate struggle, but the bond between human and Celestian proved stronger than Lyra had anticipated. As they fought, the ship shuddered again. A new voice came over the intercom. Calm, authoritative, and decidedly not part of Lyra's crew. Attention, Celestian vessel. This is Captain Zara of the science ship Nebula Seeker. We've received your distress call and are prepared to board. Stand down immediately. Lyra's face contorted with rage and disbelief. No, we're so close. Taking advantage of her distraction, Serafina executed a flawless, disarming maneuver, sending Lyra's weapon skittering across the floor. In moments, the leader of the rogue faction found herself restrained, her plans crumbling around her. As Captain Zara and her security team boarded the ship, Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He turned to Serafina, drinking in the sight of her, disheveled, breathing hard but radiantly alive. We did it, he said, a grin spreading across his face. Serafina's answering smile was like the dawn breaking. We're not done yet, she reminded him. But yes, we did it. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Captain Zara, after hearing their story, agreed to escort them back to the Celestian homeworld. As they traveled, Ethan and Serafina worked tirelessly, compiling evidence of Lyra's conspiracy and preparing their case for the Council of Elders. It was during a rare quiet moment that Ethan found Serafina alone, gazing out at the stars streaking by. Credit for your thoughts? He asked, moving to stand beside her. Serafina's expression was pensive. I'm thinking about everything that's happened, everything that's about to happen. Ethan, what we're proposing, it will change the course of both our civilizations forever. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility. I know, it's a lot to process, but I believe it's the right thing to do. Serafina turned to face him, her golden eyes searching his. And what about us? Where do we fit into all of this? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I don't know exactly what the future holds, he said softly, but I do know that whatever comes next, I want to face it with you by my side. Serafina's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. As do I, she murmured. The moment was interrupted by the ship's intercom, announcing their approach to the Celestian homeworld. Reality reasserted itself, but the connection between them remained, a tangible thing full of promise. The hearing before the Council of Elders was grueling, lasting for hours as Ethan and Serafina presented their evidence and argued their case. They faced skepticism, hostility, and deeply ingrained prejudices. But as they spoke of the potential for cooperation between their species, of the bright future that could be forged together, Ethan saw a change come over the assembled leaders. Finally, as the planet's twin suns began to set, casting the council chamber in a warm golden glow, the chief elder rose to deliver their verdict. We have heard your testimony and examined the evidence, she intoned, her ancient eyes sweeping the chamber. It is clear that great changes must be made if our people are to survive and thrive. She paused, the weight of centuries seeming to settle on her shoulders. The path you propose is not without risk. It will require us to re-examine long-held beliefs and traditions. But in the face of extinction, we must be willing to embrace new possibilities. Ethan held his breath, scarcely daring to hope. Therefore, the chief elder continued, we accept your proposal. A new era of cooperation between Celestians and humans will begin, effective immediately. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, shouts of triumph, cries of outrage, and everything in between. But for Ethan, it all faded into background noise as he turned to Serafina. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them came rushing to the surface. So, Ethan said, a smile tugging at his lips. What now? Serafina's answering smile was radiant. Now, Ethan Graves, we build the future. Together. In the weeks and months that followed, Ethan and Serafina threw themselves into their work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. They coordinated with human scientists, set up cultural exchange programs, and worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between their two species. Through it all, their bond deepened. What had started as antagonism had blossomed into respect, then friendship, and now, something more. They faced opposition and setbacks, but always they faced them together. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the glittering Celestian capital, Ethan turned to Serafina. The starlight caught in her hair, making it shimmer like spun gold. "You know," he mused, "when I woke up that morning on Earth, I never imagined I'd end up here. Changing the course of two civilizations, falling for an alien warrior princess?" Serafina arched an eyebrow. "Warrior princess?" Ethan grinned. "Well, you have to admit, it has a nice ring to it." She shook her head, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. "You humans, and your dramatic flair." "Hey, you love it," Ethan teased. Serafina's expression softened. "Yes," she said quietly, "I suppose I do." As they stood there on the cusp of a new era for both their peoples, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And really, he wouldn't have it any other way. The stars twinkled above, silent witnesses to the beginning of a new chapter in the history of two worlds. As Ethan and Serafina's lips met in a long-awaited kiss, those stars seemed to shine just a little bit brighter, heralding the dawn of a future filled with hope, understanding, and love. Ethan's pulse raced as he paced the room, his gaze darting towards the entrance to the Celestian medical chamber. The air felt thick with anticipation, yet there was something intimate about the moment, a deep, unspoken connection between him and Serafina that transcended the chaos of their previous struggles. The sterile white walls hummed softly with the distant sound of medical equipment, but Ethan's focus was singular, waiting. Serafina had been inside for hours, the alien healers attending to her. She insisted she was fine, that her body was stronger than any human's, and that giving birth, even to a hybrid child, was well within her capacity. But still, Ethan couldn't help the gnawing anxiety building in his chest. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and the chief healer stepped out, her green skin shimmering under the chamber lights. Ethan rushed forward, his heart hammering in his chest. "Is she?" he started, his voice rough with worry. "She is strong," the healer said, her voice calm but warm. "As is your child." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a tidal wave. He exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Can I see her?" The healer nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. Inside, Serafina lay on a raised platform, propped up slightly, her hair tousled and skin glowing with the sheen of exertion. Despite her weariness, there was a certain peace in her expression that Ethan had rarely seen. Her golden eyes found his immediately, and a small smile curved her lips. "You're here," she said softly, her voice steady but holding an undercurrent of emotion. "Of course I am," Ethan replied, his feet carrying him towards her in a few quick strides. Serafina's gaze dropped, and Ethan followed it to the small, tightly wrapped bundle in her arms. The hybrid child. Their child. The tiny figure was mostly swaddled, but Ethan could already see the soft hue of pale, slightly blue skin and the unmistakable shape of a human nose. The child was perfect, an incredible blend of their two species of them. Ethan reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the soft fabric of the swaddle. "A boy or a girl?" "A girl," Serafina whispered, her eyes flickering with a warmth that Ethan had never seen before. "She's ours, Ethan." His throat tightened. He had faced death more times than he could count, had fought his way through battles and stood against overwhelming odds. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, for the overwhelming flood of emotion that came with seeing his daughter. "She's beautiful," Ethan murmured, leaning in to gently touch the baby's cheek. The tiny warmth of her skin sent a jolt of something primal through him, a fierce protective instinct, a connection that was raw and undeniable. Serafina watched him, her expression softening even more as she saw the awe in his eyes. "This is what we've been fighting for, Ethan. A future where both our species can survive, thrive, together." He met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. I didn't think it would feel like this. Serafina smiled faintly, the exhaustion in her body tempered by the fulfillment of their shared victory. Neither did I. For a moment, the weight of everything they had been through hung in the air between them. All the battles, the politics, the resistance. But now, as they gazed down at the tiny being in Serafina's arms, it all seemed worth it. They had fought for survival, not just of their species, but for the possibility of something greater. This child was the embodiment of that hope. Serafina shifted slightly, wincing at the movement, and Ethan immediately stepped closer. You should rest. She shook her head, her eyes never leaving the child. I'm fine. You just gave birth to a hybrid alien-human baby. You've earned a break, Ethan teased lightly, though his voice was still thick with emotion. Serafina glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in her tired eyes. You sound like one of your Earth doctors. I'm not made of glass. No, you're stronger than anyone I know, Ethan said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. Serafina's gaze softened again, and she leaned her head back against the pillow. Stay with me. Ethan didn't need any more encouragement. He slid onto the platform beside her, careful not to jostle the baby. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they sat there together in silence, staring down at the future they had created. 5 years had passed, and the Celestian capital had transformed into something Ethan had only dreamed about in those early days. The alliance between Earth and the Celestians had flourished, not without challenges, but with mutual respect and understanding. And now humanity and Celestians were bound by more than just treaties and promises. They were bound by blood. Ethan watched from the balcony of their home, the sweeping skyline of the Celestian city glittering in the distance. Children's laughter echoed from below, where groups of hybrid children played in the gardens. His daughter, now a sprightly, curious 5-year-old with piercing golden eyes and a mischievous streak, was in the center of it all. The hybrids, as the media had dubbed them, were thriving, strong, intelligent, and already demonstrating the best of both species. The initial fears about the compatibility of the two races had been put to rest as more and more children were born to human fathers and Celestian mothers. Ethan leaned against the railing, his mind drifting back to those early days when everything had been uncertain. Now the Celestian population was growing again, and the genetic crisis that had threatened to destroy their civilization was nothing but a distant memory. The door behind him slid open, and Serafina stepped out, her presence as commanding as ever, though motherhood had added a new layer of warmth to her once steely demeanor. She came to stand beside him, following his gaze to their daughter below. She's getting better at climbing trees, Serafina remarked, her voice filled with equal parts amusement and pride. Ethan chuckled. She's got your determination. And your stubbornness, Serafina added, a playful smirk tugging at her lips. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as their daughter led the other children in some game that seemed to involve a lot of running and laughing. Hard to believe this all started with us, Ethan said quietly, his eyes still on the children. Serafina's gaze turned serious for a moment as she considered his words. It was never just us. But yes, we started something bigger than ourselves. Ethan glanced at her, his heart swelling with the weight of everything they had built together. The bond between them had only grown stronger over the years, deepened by the shared experience of raising a child, of fighting for their future. And it's still growing, Serafina added, her voice quieter now. More human men are coming every year, and more Celestian women are willing to make the journey to Earth. The children, they're saving our people. Ethan smiled, remembering the influx of volunteers. Strong, capable men from Earth who had willingly embarked on a journey across the stars, not just to father children, but to help rebuild a civilization. It had been an unexpected success, but now it felt as though it had always been meant to be. It's strange, Ethan mused. When I first got pulled into this, I never imagined it would end up like this. A peaceful partnership. Families. Serafina turned to face him fully, her eyes gleaming with the fierce pride that had always defined her. You underestimate the power of hope, Ethan. He smiled softly, his gaze dropping to the ground below, where their daughter laughed with her friends. Maybe I do. Serafina stepped closer, wrapping an arm around his waist. But you helped create it. That's what matters. They stood there together, watching as the children, the future of two species, ran through the gardens, their laughter carrying up on the warm evening breeze. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was a future filled with hope, one that Ethan had fought for, and one he now shared with Serafina and their daughter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan leaned down and pressed a kiss to Serafina's temple. "Here's to whatever comes next," he murmured. Serafina smiled, her eyes flickering with the same amusement they had held that first day on the celestial matriarch. Together, always. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Ethan felt the familiar sense of peace wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, side by side, together.